The shop isn't yours anymore. I already took $50,000. If you make a big deal out of this, I'll accuse you of skimming cash." Linda Carter said that in front of two unfamiliar men who were taking down the sign from the front of the shop. She stood behind the reception desk, where I had worked 12 hours a day for 5 years, and smiled as if she had just completed a smart business deal. And that is the story of Hannah Carter. There is a kind of loss that doesn't come from strangers, but from the person who once held your hand and walked you through the door on opening day. People often say, family is the safest place. But if that very place signs away the work of your hands overnight, what would you do? And I'm Lisa. Before I tell Hannah's story, I want to ask you, are you watching this from a quiet living room in Texas or from a small kitchen in Ohio where you once sacrificed your entire youth? Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from. If this story speaks to you, please like and subscribe. And stay until the end, because sometimes justice doesn't come from a courtroom, but from a signature at the right moment. I pushed the door open and walked into the salon at 9 a.m., the smell of acetone and lotion as familiar as ever. But the Carter Nails Studio sign had been taken down halfway, the last screw dangling from the edge of the wall. Two men in blue polo shirts were measuring the gel polish counter, jotting notes on a clipboard. They didn't look at me. They looked at the space. My mother stood behind the reception desk, her hand resting on the appointment book. She said Brandon had just lost an investment opportunity, and she couldn't let her son sink. She said this shop should help the family when it's needed. The business license had been in her name from the beginning, when I wasn't legally able to register it myself. I had believed that was safe. I walked past the cream-colored waiting chairs, past the OPI polish rack arranged by shade. Nail station number 3 sat by the window, where my grandmother had once stood on opening day, her hands trembling as she cut the red ribbon. I placed my hand on the back of the swivel chair. The leather felt cool. Something exploded quietly in my head, but all I asked was, "How much did you sell it for?" $120,000, she answered calmly. $50,000 as a deposit. I nodded, as if she were quoting the price of new polish. I looked up at the POS system, still logged into my administrator account. I glanced at the lease agreement framed behind the desk, my name printed on the first line. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I opened the cash drawer and pulled out a stack of papers clipped together with a silver binder clip. For the first time in my life, I smiled at my mother. In that moment, I did something she never expected. Can you guess what it was? If you want to know, comment, "Continue," and I'll tell you. I placed the papers on the counter, my fingers still smelling like top coat. 5 years ago, I stood outside a bank in Phoenix and signed a $40,000 loan with an interest rate that wasn't easy for a 22-year-old. My mother only held the license because I wasn't eligible back then. The lease, 3 years at a time, renewed twice, carried my signature. Rent was $3,200 a month. Electricity, water, supplies. Every number ran through my account. Brandon walked into the salon for the first time in months, hands in his pockets, avoiding my eyes. I remembered the 3 transfers I had sent him. $6,000, $5,000, $7,000, $18,000 in total. No promissory notes, no deadlines, just promises over Sunday dinner. An older regular customer still sat in the waiting chair, an AARP magazine in her hands. She glanced back and forth between my mother and me. My mother gave a small laugh and said, "My daughter is good at doing nails, but not at running a business." She had said it before as a joke. Today, it hit the salon floor like metal. I stepped behind the counter and opened my laptop. The screen lit up with hundreds of unread Gmail messages. I typed LLC transfer into the search bar. The confirmation email from 8 months ago appeared. I had registered the Carter Nails Studio trademark under my own limited liability company, transferring full rights to the brand and logo to that entity. At the time, I simply thought I needed to separate finances clearly. I turned the screen toward myself and reread every line. My mother's personal license allowed the shop to operate, but the trademark, the lease, the POS system, the merchant account, all were in my name or under my company. She could sell a promise. She could sell the keys, but she didn't own everything within these four walls. I closed the laptop. The air inside the salon felt thick. My mother looked at me, waiting. I simply asked the man holding the measuring tape, "Have you reviewed the lease?" He paused, looked at me, then at my mother. He introduced himself as Gary Wilson, 62 years old, a small investor in beauty salons around Mesa. His voice was slow, steady, a man more comfortable with contracts and numbers than emotions. "I wired $50,000 yesterday morning," he said, eyes fixed on my mother. I nodded and walked to the file cabinet against the wall. The lease sat in a blue folder, its edges worn from renewals. I placed it between us and opened to page 3. The assignment clause was printed in bold. "Have you seen this section?" I asked. Gary leaned down to read. My mother interrupted. "That lease transfers automatically with the business license. I already explained." He looked up. "Linda said the lease transfers automatically," he repeated, but this time it sounded like a question. I turned the document toward him, my finger resting on the line. "The lease may not be assigned without the signature of the primary tenant." My signature sat at the bottom, not hers. The atmosphere shifted. The hum of the air conditioner grew louder. The older customer quietly folded her magazine. Gary looked at my mother. "You didn't mention this." My mother folded her arms. "It's just a family matter. She'll sign." I stood still and let the contract speak for itself. 5 years of rent, 2 renewals, every number documented. I didn't need to raise my voice. Gary closed the folder and exhaled slowly. He looked at the 2 men measuring the counter, then back at me. "We need clarity," he said. "I'm not buying legal risk." He took out his phone, sent a message, then looked up again. "I'm meeting my attorney this afternoon. All of us should be there." My mother opened her mouth to object, but Gary had already slipped the measuring tape into his pocket. He didn't look at her again. I glanced at the wall clock above the door. 10:17 a.m. My appointment book was full until 6 p.m. By afternoon, nothing would be the same. Some signatures take a minute to write, but cost a family everything to carry. That afternoon, we sat in Gary's attorney's office in downtown Mesa. Through the glass windows, the parking lot shimmered in the heat. Inside, the air conditioning was so cold I folded my arms across my chest. Gary sat across from me, my mother to his right, and I at the head of the table, my stack of documents neatly arranged in front of me. The attorney, a silver-haired man with thin glasses, flipped through the lease page by page. He paused at the assignment clause. "You are the primary tenant?" he asked. I nodded and slid forward the latest renewal with my signature. Then I opened my laptop and logged into the company registry. Carter Nails Studio LLC appeared on the screen, with me listed as the sole manager. The attorney looked up. "Legally, Ms. Linda does not have the authority to assign the lease, and this trademark belongs to the LLC managed by Ms. Hannah." My mother's face drained of color, just for a second. She adjusted her collar and called it a family misunderstanding. The office door opened. Brandon walked in, shirt half-buttoned, eyes red from lack of sleep. He didn't look at me. He looked at the attorney. You're taking this too far, Brandon said sharply. We're family. I didn't answer immediately. I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick bundle of bills secured with a rubber band. I placed it in the center of the table. Electricity, water, rent, insurance, I said, flipping to the first page. 5 years, more than $96,000, paid by me. The sound of paper turning filled the room. I looked at my mother. You sold my brand, not yours. Gary leaned back in his chair and sighed. The attorney closed the file. No one raised their voice. No one slammed a fist. But the air in the room grew heavy, as if one wrong sentence would collapse everything. My mother turned to me, her confidence from the morning gone. You'll sign, she said quietly. You don't want to embarrass the family. I held her gaze longer than usual. The clock on the wall ticked clearly. The afternoon stretched ahead of us. Brandon leaned toward me, voice tight. Just sign the transfer, and this will be over. I reopened my laptop and turned the screen toward the attorney. The trademark registration appeared clearly. Registered 6 months ago under my limited liability company. I scrolled to the section confirming full transfer of logo, signage, and marketing accounts to the LLC. I separated the brand from the personal license in February, I said evenly. My mother's license allows the shop to operate, but this name, I tapped the screen lightly, belongs to my company. The attorney leaned closer to verify the registration number. He flipped back to the transfer agreement Gary had brought. Ms. Linda sold the business under the name Carter Nails Studio, he said slowly. If she does not own the trademark, she cannot transfer its usage rights. The sentence landed like a stamp on paper. Brandon slammed his hand on the table, sharp and dry. What are you trying to do? You want Mom sued? I met his eyes. I didn't raise my voice. I pulled out the formal notice requesting suspension of the transaction, printed earlier that afternoon. I signed my name at the bottom, my handwriting steady. I slid the document toward Gary and his attorney. I request that all transfers be suspended until ownership is clarified, I said. No police officers, no handcuffs. Yet the room fell silent, as if someone had locked the door from the outside. Gary sat upright now, his expression no longer casual. He looked at my mother, then back at the documents. She stopped mentioning family. Her lips pressed tightly together. For the first time that day, the ground beneath my feet felt solid. Not because I had won, but because I had stopped yielding. We left the attorney's office late in the afternoon. The parking lot was still hot, but my stomach felt cold. Gary did not shake my mother's hand. He said briefly that he would review the entire transaction and protect his interests if there had been any misrepresentation. Brandon hurried after me to my car. What do you think you're doing? He demanded, his voice pulled tight. I owe $75,000. If this falls apart, they'll sue Mom and me. I stopped by my car door and looked directly at him. 75,000? I repeated quietly. For what? Crypto. An opportunity, Brandon said, looking away. Mom used the $50,000 deposit to pay part of it. The rest, I'm figuring out. Figuring it out. That phrase sounded so familiar, it was exhausting. I opened the car door and sat down, but I didn't start the engine. A notification popped up on my phone from the bank. Verification required for a transaction tied to the account that received the deposit. Gary had already started taking action. My mother slid into the passenger seat. She didn't look at me. Just sign, she said. This will settle down. Don't let outsiders find out. I drove back to the salon. The sign was still half removed, hanging crooked. I walked inside. and went straight to nail station number 3. The late-day sunlight came through the window and fell across the worn corner of the tabletop. I set my hand on it and stayed silent for a few seconds. I used to think that if I carried it one more time, everything would be smooth. If I signed, if I took responsibility, if I cleaned up the fallout, the family would go back to the way it was. But over the past 5 years, every time things were smooth, it only lasted a few weeks. I opened my laptop and logged into the company account. I drafted a request for the bank to temporarily freeze any transactions connected to the deposit until the dispute was resolved. I hit send without editing a word. Behind me, my mother leaned against the counter. "Do you really think you're the owner?" she said softly, but loud enough for me to hear. "Without me, you wouldn't have anything to stand here with." I closed the screen. That line didn't hurt the way it used to. It just made everything clearer. Some families don't fall apart because of money. They fall apart because the silence goes on for too long. My mother was still there, behind the reception desk where the framed opening day photo used to hang. She turned toward me, her voice no longer gentle. "I gave birth to you. You owe me. Without me, you wouldn't have this shop." Brandon leaned against the wall, arms crossed like he wanted to stand with what felt safer instead of what was right. No one was yelling, but that sentence felt like a blade driven into the table. I drew in a deep breath. I didn't cry. I didn't slam my hand down. I just looked straight at my mother. "I owe you love," I said slowly. "I don't owe you my property." Some people believe children owe their parents for life. Others believe respect has to come from both sides. "Which side are you on?" My answer wasn't loud, but it was enough to quiet the room. Brandon blinked and looked away. My mother gave a thin smile, but it didn't reach her eyes. I walked back to nail station number 3 and set the legal file on it like a marker. I opened my phone and sent a confirmation email to Gary's attorney and the bank, attaching the request to suspend the transfer and the notice of an ownership dispute. My fingers didn't shake. A few hours later, I got a reply from the bank. The deposit transaction was under review due to signs of a transfer that didn't meet legal requirements. Gary's attorney sent another email, requesting clarification about accepting money without having the right to sell. My mother saw the copied email on my screen. She went quiet for a few seconds, then said, "You're really making this a big deal." I didn't answer. I kept going, sending an official notice to the city licensing office, requesting re-verification of the trademark rights and the lease. Each email went out like doors closing behind me. No police showed up. No one was put in handcuffs. But from that moment on, it wasn't a family matter anymore. It became a file, an investigation, signatures and stamped documents. My mother looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe for the first time, she saw that I wasn't the daughter who would stay quiet to keep the peace. And for the first time, I didn't feel myself shrinking in front of her. 2 days later, Gary emailed to confirm he was pulling out of the deal. He said he didn't want to get tangled in a legal dispute between my mother and me. The $50,000 deposit was still being held by the bank pending clarification. My shop was temporarily safe, but the heir in our family wasn't. Brandon didn't call me. I heard from someone we knew that his creditor had filed a civil lawsuit over the unpaid $75,000. Numbers start to feel real when they're attached to your name on paper. That night, on my attorney's advice, I checked the county's public records. A new entry had appeared. My mother had just refinanced her own house to borrow another $30,000. The signing date matched the day she took Gary's deposit. I sat at the back counter in the salon, staring at the cold glow of the screen. This wasn't just a story about selling a nail shop anymore. It had become a debt spiral. The next morning, I asked my mother to meet me at a coffee shop near the salon. She arrived 15 minutes late, dark circles under her eyes. I didn't dance around it. I can help with part of it, I said, but only if you sign an agreement not to interfere with the shop anymore. No putting your name on anything, no making decisions, no signing anything for me. She looked at me like I'd suggested something unforgivable. So you're trying to force your own mother out of her own family? I just want clarity, I said. She shook her head. I'm not signing. I'm not going to let you treat me like an outsider. I stayed quiet for a few seconds. The coffee in front of me had gone cold. I took out the papers I'd prepared and looked at the blank signature line at the bottom. Then I folded them and slipped them back into my bag. Then I can't help, I said. For the first time, I stood up from that table without promising to fix the consequences for anyone. When I stepped outside, the Arizona sun was blinding. Something in my chest had just cracked, and something else had just been set upright. 3 days later, I reopened the salon. The sign had been reattached with new screws, straighter than before. I came early and lifted the roll-up door while the morning was still mild. No noise, no one waiting out front. Just the smell of nail polish and the dim light through the glass. Nail station number 3 was still in its old spot by the window. A small corner of the tabletop paint had chipped, probably from the day those men set their measuring tools on it. I took fine sandpaper, smoothed it lightly, then laid down a fresh coat, a soft nude, the same shade my grandmother liked when she sat there on opening day. I blew gently to help it dry faster. My first client that morning was Margaret, 70 years old, silver hair pinned neatly back. She sat down in chair number 3 like she always did, her purse on her lap. "Honey, I heard what happened," she said quietly, watching me through the mirror. "Don't let anyone take what you built." I smiled, my hands steady as I trimmed and painted her nails. No one in the salon mentioned lawsuits or money, but everyone knew something had changed. At noon, I sat alone at the counter and opened the banking app. The balance in the business account was lower than I'd ever seen. Attorney fees, processing fees, a few days of the salon being closed. The number was almost down to the minimum. I closed my phone and looked around the salon. The chairs, the polish lined up in neat rows, the appointment book filled with familiar names. I had kept all of this, but Sunday dinners would never be the same. My phone stayed quiet. No text from my mother, no call from Brandon. Late afternoon, after the last client left, I sat back down at station number 3. The late-day sunlight landed on the freshly painted tabletop, reflecting a soft strip of light. I touched it and asked myself one question. Was it worth it? If you've made it this far, what do you feel for me? Anger, sympathy, or understanding? Leave just one word. A month later, Brandon left Arizona. I heard from someone we knew that he moved to Nevada, found a new job, and started over. My mother didn't call me anymore. Sunday dinners on the porch of that white-railed house disappeared from the calendar. My phone still lit up every night, but her name never appeared. The salon still opened every morning. Clients still booked 2 weeks out. I still stood behind the counter and greeted them with the same familiar smile. Everything looked almost the same, except I was different. Keeping the salon wasn't a loud victory. It was more like staying upright after a hard win than holding a trophy in the air. I lost part of my family, or maybe I only lost the illusion of it. A boundary isn't rebellion. It's how an adult says, "This is as far as it goes." For years, I thought love meant unconditional sacrifice. Now I know love without limits only leaves an opening for someone to step through. I don't fix other people by erasing my name from what I own. Nail station number 3 was still there by the window, the nude polish catching the afternoon light. Every time I set my hand on that tabletop, I remembered the day I was weak because I wanted to keep the peace. and the day I was strong enough to say no. This story is fictional, inspired by real-life situations and human experiences. The video's content is supported by AI and edited by a human to offer reflection and emotional value. We do not encourage anyone to imitate the actions in this video. The narrator simply believes that sometimes boundaries are a form of love, for others and for yourself. If there's one small gift this story can leave you with, it's the courage to read every clause before you sign, and to listen to the voice inside you when it whispers, "That's enough." Where are you watching from? Texas? California? Or a small town where you once placed your whole youth into a family? Did this story make you think of someone? Leave a comment and share what's on your mind. If you believe family should be built on respect, not just blood, hit like so more people can hear this story too. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you won't miss the next story. Thank you for staying until the end. Your listening mattered. To me, and maybe to you too.